and some other projects around about that. I'm very happy to take questions at any point, and you know, given some of the issues that have been raised about Primo, I'm very happy to answer any questions about the sorts of things that we've dealt with, and if I can help at all. So do feel free to ask questions. This is my title, as you can see, Resource Discovery, Research and Projects Manager. That role is very much on the business side. I'm not a technical person. I work across the library with many of the staff on projects to do with data and getting data into Primo, or in ways that we want to find the data and therefore find the content. So my role is quite a wide-ranging one, but I'm not a techie. So why did we get Primo in the first place? Well, we were, as has been mentioned, already a customer of eLabris. We have had Aleph for 10 years now, and we felt that it would be good. We wanted to look at a new resource discovery system, and we felt it would be a good thing to work with something that would work with systems that we already had. But in particular, we wanted to look for something that would give us new functionality, because we were developing new services or changing our services. We were very keen to get something that's scalable, because I will give you some statistics later. We have a lot of stuff, and so we needed something that would be able to manage the numbers of records that we have. We also, from experience, knew about there is a very good community grouping in eLabris. I don't know if any of you have had anything to do with these groups, but there are user groups, national ones, international ones, and also product working groups. So you do get a lot of opportunity to input to the development of the products through these things. And we also, we're talking 5 years ago now, we're aware that we needed to do more to provide access and discovery to more digital content. One of the things that we also liked about Primo and about the eLabris products in general is they have an open platform strategy, and as has been mentioned, the EL Commons setup does allow you to exchange information, code with new things that people have done. So you get input from other customers as well as from eLabris as a company. As I mentioned, we have worked with eLabris for a long time, and we felt that they do know something about our working practices and setup. The British Library is very large and quite complex, has many different departments and sections, as I'm sure some of you do in your libraries. But we felt it was important to work with people who understood our business needs. So we went for Primo, and we started off and we just set up the out-of-the-box system, and we had a look at it. And we decided that we would go live with it and get feedback. So we also had a project process of continuous releases, and I'll say something more about that in a moment. But that meant that between 2008 and 2012, we had actually 12 releases of our Primo. So the project planning, as I said, was more frequent than usual, because there were new releases of software fairly regularly. We also wanted to add new sources of data. We wanted to take advantage of new functionality that came out with the new releases, and these included changes and improvements to the Web 2 facilities, which we were interested in implementing. One of the drivers, again, which has been mentioned for going for Primo, was that we wanted to have something that fitted in more with people's expectation of how to search the Google age. In particular, some years ago, there were surveys done, particularly in the United States, on where students start to look for content, and it's not on the library website or on the library catalogue. It's Google and sometimes they end up at the library catalogue, but not always. So we wanted to embrace that and make our systems more compatible with those expectations. So the way that we set up the project meant that we were in a kind of permanent beta situation, or continuous improvement, you could call it. That was actually something that was quite difficult for some of our staff who had been used to working on projects to accept. The people who had had a lot of project management experience expected a project to have a beginning, some work in the middle, an end, and then launch it. They didn't like the idea of putting out something that wasn't finished or wasn't ready. And we had quite a culture change to get people to accept that. I think now almost all of our projects are actually managed in that way, but our Primo project was one of the first to be set up in that way. Our Primo system is no longer a project, it is now business as usual, and I'll say some more about that in a moment. We ran Primo, which we call Explore the British Library, if you haven't seen the website. We ran it in parallel for about 3.5 years with our old Aleph OPAC. And during that time, we got a lot of feedback from staff and users and made changes, as I've described here. But we also, in our reading rooms in particular, the head of the reading room staff was very determined to get people to use Explore, use Primo, rather than the old OPAC. And so she encouraged staff to do that, and they in turn encouraged the customers, the readers, to do that. So we had quite a lot of people who were already using Explore by the time we went fully live with it. This is just a list of the sources of data that we harvest into Primo. I should say that at the moment we don't use either MetaLib or Primo Central. We are looking at Primo Central, but all the sources of data are managed by us. So they are not all systems that we manage ourselves. So SFX, for example, is obviously not ours, but we import the knowledge base data into our Primo and on this long list of other sources. So in total, we now have around 63 million records in our locally hosted Primo. I did think until this week that we were the largest implementation locally hosted in the world, but apparently ETH have overtaken us, so we're not anymore. However, we are one of the biggest. So, in order to go for a full launch of Explore the British Library, we had to switch off the old OPAC altogether. One of the big things we had to do this was about communication and training. It was really preparing everybody that the old OPAC was no longer going to be there, that you know, it's been there for 3 years running in parallel and people have seen it and got used to it. But we did extensive communication both with staff and with customers. However, it was still a shock because there were still lots of people out there who kind of blinkered to the fact that we were going to do this, or had decided that they didn't want to know and they weren't going to even look at it. So when we switched it off, we got quite a lot of panic feedback, I think could best describe it, in the form of telephone calls and emails and people going into the reading rooms and not knowing what was going on and what was this horrible new thing and where's my old OPAC and all that kind of thing. So we had to manage that. We run, I think it's quarterly customer surveys where we ask people about how they're satisfied with all of our services, including access to our content through catalogues, etc. And the survey immediately after the switch off showed a decline in satisfaction from the customers because we changed the system. So this caused a bit of a panic at the highest levels, that our customers were no longer happy. But I think my view was that this is about change. People don't like change, and however you do it and however long you lead into it, some people are going to be unhappy about it. And I think that was the case, because the survey that we actually did at the end of last year showed that the levels of satisfaction of customers with the catalogue, access to content, were back up to the pre-switch-off levels. So customers had got used to it and got over the bump of the change, and we're now working with the new system pretty much as happily as they were with the old one. There'll always be some people who are not happy, and we still have the odd person who sends us an email saying, I liked the old one much better, but you know, I think that happens with any form of change. So it was a bit of a difficult time, but we came through it pretty much unscathed. We do have a separate implementation of Primo, which has this rather long name because we haven't thought of a snappy one yet. Search our catalogue, archives and manuscripts, and this is a version of Primo that contains all the archive and manuscript records. This was developed in parallel with the in-house development of a new cataloguing system for this material, and we needed some kind of resource discovery system. So we decided that as we already had Primo up and running for our main catalogue, that we would implement it for archives and manuscripts. The issue, really, the reason why we went for a separate one is because of the hierarchical nature of archives in particular. That you get collections of things where you need to have things join up. Those of you who know about archives will know what I'm talking about. And it was decided that that would not really merge very easily with the kind of more straightforward flat catalogue records. So we went for a separate implementation. And we worked closely with our staff in those areas. We had a huge data migration task to carry out from a lot of different legacy systems that we had with archival records in them, which completed in 2012. And we now have 3 million archive and manuscript records within this separate implementation. There is a requirement, and has been from the beginning, that, and we don't have this yet, to provide a hierarchical view of this data. So that is the tree view, where you can see the whole of the content of the collection. So we are looking at an in-house development of that this year. We're also looking at merging the records with our main Explore the British Library, because we do still ideally want to have one point of access for customers to all our material, and we're conscious that this currently we don't have because we have the two separate systems. So this is just a visual diagram showing you on the left hand side all the sources of data that I described. The top pink block is all the LF data. So we have various different data sets within there, but they are all catalogued within LF. And then the others listed are from different systems. So it was mentioned that you can harvest into Primo different formats and from different systems, and some of these are other ILS's. Sound archive data, for example, is on a Circe Dynix system, and some of them are in-house systems. So there's quite a variety of different sources and different formats that we harvest into Primo. So the central block is just to show you everything in Primo. As you can see, SFX is fundamental to providing access to this material, and the right-hand side are the various services and systems that we provide for access and delivery to all this content. Okay, one of the things that is my kind of mantra to staff is that Explore the British Library Primo is for users. It's not really there for staff, it's for customers to access the content that we have. And although obviously staff know a lot about the data and they know their customers if they work in the reading rooms, we need to be driven by what our customers, our users want. So when we began the project of putting Primo in 4 to 5 years ago, what we were aiming for were larger aggregations of data, bringing all these different systems and sources of data together, to have a single point of discovery, to be able to integrate much more closely and seamlessly with our delivery and access services, and also the Web 2 bit to allow users to interact with the content, to provide feedback, tag records, put reviews or notes on them, that kind of thing, and the social media links as well. Where we are now, I think, is we spent a lot of time bringing all this content together into one big pot so that customers can search across it all. But I think, particularly because we have so much and so many records in our Primo, that we now find people actually can be confused by what they're looking at. If they come in and they just want one book, then we do get feedback saying, I don't want to know about all this electronic stuff and all these other maps and things, I just want that book, and how do I find it in all these records? So we are looking at ways that we can improve that. I should say we do have a very wide range of customers as well, which you probably experience as well. We have people who are, yes, the man who just wants his one manuscript and he may have never used a computer before, ranging to the other extreme where we have researchers who are very savvy with all the kind of latest technology, and they want to be able to use new and modern exciting interfaces and get to exciting content. So we have to try and provide services and content that suits all these people, which is quite a challenge. So we are looking as well at semantic searching, and I'll talk specifically about a project that we have set up in order to look at doing that. Also full text searching. Again, we have all these records. We know we can do full text searching via Primo, so this is more about how do we actually present this to the customers. Because again, this is just yet more content, more items coming up in your index that just could serve to completely confuse people. So if we're going to do this, we need to present this in some kind of coherent way so that people understand what they're looking at and know how to get it. And the last thing is really more personalisation, which has been mentioned, and I'll say a little bit about our interest in that as well. So we have a small project which is called Next Generation Search Tools, and that's really looking at, as I say, what can we add on to what we already have for our readers to access the content in three specific areas. So semantic search, data visualization we're looking at, and the full text searching. So the first stage of this project was focusing on semantic searching. So what we did there, we had a smallish budget, and we put together a tender which sort of said, well, we would like to do some semantic searching with our data. What can you do with it? It was very, very vague and very woolly. We are fortunate in that the British National Bibliography data is actually already out there as linked data. So we basically said to 4 companies that we selected, here is the BNB data, it's linked data, what can you do with it to show us how semantic search might be beneficial to our way of providing access for customers. And so we ended up with a pilot. It was quite impressive. The company that we gave the contract to was called Avant-Garde Labs, and in fact it's the University of Saxony or Saxony State Library that already has something similar set up with Avant-Garde Labs. So if you, because we haven't gone live with this, this is just an in-house pilot, but if you wanted to have a look, then they have the same setup. And basically it uses Wikipedia to enrich the data in your search, and so you get links that are not obvious, and they're not necessarily links that relate to the terms in your search, if that makes sense. So an example was, a very British one, if you search for Plantagenet kings, you will get Angevin kings, and the word Plantagenet may not appear anywhere in your record because it's done the linking into Wikipedia and got the context that this is a subject that's related. So it was quite interesting. And you can set a sort of sliding scale of how much or how intense you want this to be or not. So you can get just a kind of straightforward standard search, or you can enrich it by varying degrees. So we're kind of playing with this at the moment, seeing what it looks like, but it's quite an interesting way forward, I think.
I will do, I think, after your presentation.
You're going to share them?
I show a live demo of Primo and Wikipedia enrichment, so that you can also try later on, do your search in that environment and see what great results are.
Yes, it's interesting. And the other thing we are looking at, which again has been mentioned, is the scholar ranking, where customers can decide what their topic of interest is, and then their result sets will actually be loaded to give them a more relevant search result. The person who's been mostly involved in developing this for Ex Libris is Tamar Sadeh, who I don't know whether any of you have come across. She does presentations at the conferences quite often if you've been to any of those. But she is working with us at the moment to see how we might use this specifically, because we're quite interested in how we might develop this. So, that's kind of what we've done so far. Where we are now, I think what we want to focus on, there are some very specific things to do with Primo. The facets that we set up, we did this some time ago. We have made some changes to them, but we feel that there are perhaps more useful, more focused things we could do with the facets. I should say one of the issues about the facets is that it very much depends on your data. And we have a lot of data, and it's very varying in its level of detail, and also its quality, I have to say, because these are records that have been catalogued over many years, some kind of transcribed from not terribly good records in the first place. So you do get quite a variety of results, and obviously if you don't have the data to support a facet within your record, then it doesn't show up in the facets. So we're trying to see whether we can improve that to make it more useful to customers. The second thing we're looking at, which has also been mentioned, is the grouping, the furthering. Again, this is to do with data quite a lot, but it's also to do with what are the elements of the records that are used to make the grouping. And again, because of the variety of our data, we get sometimes quite good results and other times terrible results because it just doesn't work, and we need to try and configure the back office to manage that. You can do this differently on material types, for example. So we're looking at how we can actually manage that. So a good example where it doesn't work and where we've actually switched it off is in our music records, because one of the main fields that you use for this is the uniform title, which for our music score records says things like symphony or something like that. So you obviously get literally hundreds, if not thousands, of records that group together, which is nonsense. So we need to look at better ways of doing that. So we've switched it off until we can sort out a better way to present that. Version 4 of Primo has browsing as a functionality, which we haven't had up to now, but which quite a lot of, especially cataloguing staff, are very keen to have. We know that it's available, but we want to have a look at actually how does it work, and how does it work with our data in particular. So that's something we're looking at the moment. One thing that I should say is driving us at the moment. The British Library is a legal deposit library, and we have for many years been taking a copy of every print item that is published in the UK. The law changed on the 6th of April to include digital publishing, so we now have to take in everything that's published digitally in the UK as well as print. So we've had lots of big programs going on to actually manage the taking in, the ingest, the preservation, etc. of this material. But we also have to consider access as well. And this will be content that we have to put into our own storage system, not access via websites. So we need to have a slicker system to provide access to that. We're also looking at a form of meta-searching, though not meta-lib. We had a project with the BBC over the last couple of years who basically have created a catalogue of all the programmes they've ever made. And we have this at the moment on standalone systems in our reading rooms, but we want to be able to link to that data. Because of the arrangement with the BBC, we're not going to harvest the data into Primo as we have up to now. We will access their systems, so we need to be able to link out. And that will also apply to the archived websites that we are currently harvesting the UK web domain, and we are storing that separately, and we'll need to access that as well. And finally, we are looking at Primo Central. We're in the process of signing a contract for that because it will provide us with access to more content. But from my point of view, this is more about the user experience. What will that look like? How will customers access it? It comes back to this whole thing about not confusing people with the massive amount of content there is available to them, helping them to navigate through it to find the things they want. So before we set that up and go live with it, we will certainly be looking at what we want that to look like from the user's point of view. Okay, that's it. Anybody have any questions?
Will you give a preview?
The website.